Hey, and welcome back to the Games Week Berlin Twitch stream. We are not just about playing games, but also about talking games. And with me is my co-host Tim. Welcome, Tim. We're going to do a panel, and we're going to talk a little bit about a specific subject. You want to introduce that a little bit?
Yes. Hi, Utz. I am Tim. I'm the program director of the Games Week Berlin. And we're going to talk about intellectual property. So intellectual property is the business side of video games. How some video games become so big that they turn into a pillow where you sleep on, or a cup, or like a TV show like The Witcher on Netflix, or like a big movie. Or on the other side, how they become from movies a video game. Spider-Man is one of the examples. Comic book, lots of movies, and lots of video games as well. And this is a very interesting business aspect because there's a lot of money in it. And we're talking about if you can plan it and how you plan it.
And we're not going to do it alone, of course. We have interesting experts with us, of course remotely due to certain circumstances. It's Christian, Rowan, and Jan. How are you? Nice to have you.
Hi. Hi. Good to see you. How you doing?
All right, so maybe we're just going to do a quick round of introductions. Maybe we're just going to start with Jan on the top left. Tell us a little bit about yourself, your projects.
Right. My name is Jan Theysen. I'm a creative director at King Art Games. So we're an independent developer from Bremen, Germany. And the last game we released was Iron Harvest, a real-time strategy game. 2 months ago now, and we keep working on it and hopefully building an IP around Iron Harvest and do more games in this world in the future.
Awesome. Maybe we're going to continue with Rowan.
Hi, my name is Rowan Tafler. I'm the brand director at SEGA Searchlight. You might have heard of SEGA, but Searchlight may be a new thing. And we are the team at SEGA that's all about finding new teams and IPs, helping them to kind of develop and grow and ultimately add them into the SEGA family. So I, as a marketing director, I work with teams on their marketing strategy. So it's all about brand positioning, finding the right message to bring to the right community. But I've worked in sort of IP and licensing for, well, pretty much all my career.
All right, awesome. And our next and final guest is Christian.
Hi, I'm Christian Fonnesbech. So I'm a narrative director in Frankfurt for Deck 13. And I'm also an IP consultant. So I'm working with investors and game developers actually to make their games into IPs instead of just being games.
All right. I also heard that you brought a little presentation with you. So why don't we just get right on that and see what you got?
Sure. Are you seeing this?
Not yet.
Okay. It should be.
Here we go.
Should be up.
Yeah, we're good. Awesome.
Okay. So I was asked to just do a brief introduction about what IPs and brands really are. And if you're a game developer, then this is how you spend many of your nights, looking at the ceiling and wondering if your next game will be a disaster or a hit and not knowing at all. And when you've done that for a few years, you start to realize that no matter how much you love your game, the laws of business can still kill it from one day to the next after you've launched. So the next thought us game developers get is that we want what the big guys have. We want what SEGA has, which is basically sustainability. They're able to say, if we launch a new game in this IP, we can count on this many players. Not totally, but around that. And the example I like to use is IO Interactive from Copenhagen. They made the Hitman IP and franchise. And for 20 years, they built a studio around a series of 7 games. And, when game developers talk about what they're putting into the game, the characters in the story are only quite a small part of it. But when IO Interactive sold the company, the rights to that character were 60% of the value of the entire company. And that's what an IP is. An IP is that you've built something that you can legally own, and it's not code, and it's not people, and it's not buildings. It's the character and the story and the love that people have for it. So just to unpack that a little, I was head of IP development at Nordisk Film Games. And what we did there was basically we invested in game studios, and then we looked at how do we make these sustainable. And basically you can break it down into these two things. So on the left, you have the brand, and that basically means that you have to be able to communicate to the market what this is in an instant, in just a few seconds. And on the right, you have the IP. And the IP, that's the characters and the love that people have for those and the uniqueness and so on. So these are two things that are quite difficult for game developers of smaller size to get their heads around. But if they do, then suddenly you're able to make a series of games because people recognize the character they loved from the last game. And you're also able to, as Tim said, branch out into other media. You can make TV series or movies and so on. And for quite a few years, that was difficult. But just the last year or two, we've seen The Witcher, we've seen Sonic, we've seen Pikachu. So now it has been proven that the love that people have for characters in video games actually does carry over into other media. So having an IP and brand is not just about having better advertisements, it's actually the core of your business if you're doing a developer. And just to finish up, I'll skip this. If you look at something like this, which is from Disney Plus's loading screen, what do you see? You see the characters, and you see the universe around them, and something that's uniquely recognizable, and some emotions that you can relate to. And that's basically what you have to do to build an IP. Yeah, look at The Witcher, for example. You have the books, you have the TV series, you have the game, but it's always the character. That's what carries it through. Thank you. That's it.
Awesome. Thank you for that. I think that really sets the stage for what we're about to talk. So I have an immediate question about this because, you know, this is an expert round. So what do you think are the key ingredients to turning your game into a successful IP? Especially because there's, you know, lots of indie devs watching. You know, where should they start?
Are you asking me?
I mean, sure, yeah.
Okay. Well, for me, it always starts with the character. If you can build a brand without a character, but you can't build an IP. So Counter-Strike is a great brand like Adidas or Nike, but it's never going to be a movie because there's no character. So start with the character.
All right.
I think that's an interesting kind of approach here, but I mean, I don't know. I think if you can look at some other kind of situations, maybe like Warhammer, for instance, you know, or even Monster Hunter, right? I don't know where the character is there. Monster Hunter, you know, coming up for a movie very soon, and I think that sometimes it can be as much of a world as it can be a character, right? As long as it has character and uniqueness to it, its personality, I guess, and maybe that's where it comes. That crossover is. If it has personality, then it means something to you, and if it has that kind of value to the audience, then that's something that's going to be really valuable.
So the uniqueness is really the most important bit, probably, because there is so much stuff out there, and you know, if people confuse, you know, your IP or your world or your characters with other characters, you know, then you probably already have a problem. So, you know, I would argue it's probably hard to do, let's say, a whatever, you know, Western or like cowboy IP, you know, with characters that look like, yeah, okay, they're cowboys, you know, but if you have something like, you know, Monster Hunter, you kind of know it's Monster Hunter based on, you know, the ridiculously huge weapons and, you know, the cat companions and all of that stuff. And, you know, it looks and feels like Monster Hunter, and I think, you know, that's very important. And of course, if you have a really, you know, unique character that is recognizable and a character that, you know, is something, or like a character you can put in different things and it still works, you know, then of course that's the unique part. But I think it's really important to think about, okay, what makes us special and recognizable.
So is an IP, Christian, you say that an IP is definitely just focused on a character, right? And Jan is saying probably it's more being recognizable, being very special. Maybe especially because Jan, with Iron Harvest, you have a very special universe that your video game is based on and built in. Can it be both? Can it be not only a character, but only something that makes you extremely unique?
Well, I think, we have both. I mean, we of course have characters in the game, and some of the characters might be something that people recognize when they see them, but also we have this the setting that is very special, and the setting is based on artworks that a Polish artist created that basically mix 19th century oil painting and classic painting and classic landscapes and stuff like that, and mixes that with Max. And each time he releases a new artwork, that's what basically people recognize. They recognize maybe a little bit the painting style, but they recognize this theme of basically mixing farmers and rural settings with this weird diesel punk element that mixing these two things together. And it's not like it's always the same Max, it's not really the same characters or anything like that, but it's the world, and this world works as a RTS video game. It works as a board game, maybe in the future as a television series, or like a movie or whatever. And so it can work in very different areas or different fields, just based on this unique art style or this unique setting, basically.
Yeah, we have a question from chat. So just a reminder, everyone who's watching, if you have any questions, just put them in chat. We're going to have a look at them. So they're asking specifically about Game of Thrones, and then in another example, is Pokemon also just Pikachu as their mascot character? Because there's more to the actual word than just this one character, and is a character advantageous in comparison to a story world? So how do these compare? So maybe to Rowan.
That was a lot of questions. Which questions should we take out of those?
Let's do the character versus story world question, because I think that's the most interesting one.
Well, maybe I can just quickly say that I think you're right about both Monster Hunter and Iron Harvest. I think, sure, you can do it without a character, but I think if you look at it from Hollywood's perspective, then you're limiting your audience quite drastically. The people who enjoy steampunk is a niche audience from Hollywood perspective. And that's what they would call an early adopter in technology terms. It's people who are really enthusiastic and articulate about what they want. But the mainstream audience is looking for a big emotion like anger or hate or, hey, he looks like Bruce Willis, he's cool, or The Witcher. The mainstream audience doesn't buy steampunk.
Yeah, on that note, Rowan, when you're looking for new games, what are the key characteristics that always draw your attention?
Yeah, that's a really good question. This whole thing about whether Hollywood needs characters, absolutely. I mean, that hugely helps in terms of identifying it, because I say they're looking after personality, and that makes sense. But I mean, the option to expand it to other media isn't necessarily where we start. It's something we think about. That kind of long-term vision is something that is definitely part of it, but I don't know. I mean, every IP kind of changes when it crosses over into a different media, right? I mean, it has to play to the strengths of the medium that it's going to. Otherwise, what's the point of actually doing that, that crossover, right? Comics aren't a storyboard for a film. Films aren't ever going to be a, one-to-one representation of a game. It's always going to make the most of the new media that it's coming to. The closest thing that I've kind of seen and worked on myself was Alien Isolation, which was down by the CA console team. It was absolutely perfect at capturing the mood and the feel of the first Alien film, but it wasn't a remake of the film. It wasn't based around necessarily Ellen Ripley. It was something new. It was its own thing. And the real value in the IP there was the atmosphere and the mood and that sense of something absolutely horrific there that you just couldn't kill and couldn't overcome. So if you do want something to cross over, it needs to work in its own medium first and foremost. Otherwise, you are building a castle on sand. You know, it needs to make the most of the medium that it's in. So in terms of what we do look for, it's really about, when we think about IP, we also think about the partnerships, about the studio that we're working with, and that's really important. It's about uniqueness, it's about vision, and it's about, you know, whether we work with them as well. So, you know, in terms of that uniqueness, we're always thinking about, okay, how can it be first or best? What's the secret sauce? What sets this apart? What's the personality there? And that works out really well. Secondly, about that vision, you know, what Christian was saying earlier on about, you know, that's that core emotional truth. That's absolutely true. It's got to mean something to that audience. But we're also thinking about, where can it go next? What's the next stage of it? Do you have a vision that's not just about, you know, the next game, but also about what could the game be in 5, 10 years? How could it go beyond that? Sega's been around for about 60 years. We've got a really long-term view of what success is, so we're always thinking about that. And finally, we just think about, you know, win-win partnerships. You know, what's going to be good for the studio, what's going to be good for us, how can we maximize both of our benefits to make sure that really works for everyone. So it's about uniqueness, vision, and about partnerships.
Christian, yes?
Can I just say I totally agree with that. That was a lot of wise words, and I think it's really important to say that the castle in the sand thing is very true. Your game is not going to be a success because it's IP suitable. Your game is going to be a success because it's a great game. But in the long term, if you don't have the IP elements in there, then you're limiting the potential benefit down the line. And the investors are looking at that from the start. And then I can't stop myself. I have to say, Alien Isolation, the character is the alien.
So
it isn't a character-based franchise.
Would you recommend? Just one question. Would you recommend for a video game that works quite well and sells quite well, but maybe doesn't have a strong character, that those who develop the game integrate the character and the story, or like 2 characters or whatever, afterwards, so that they can probably expand as an IP and build it into an IP?
So it's already launched? That's going to be tough. If it's a big success, then usually the expectations that the fans have are quite set in stone. So it's suddenly introducing a character could be dangerous, but of course it depends on the nature of the game.
Okay, sorry, Rowan, I interrupted you.
No, I guess the only thing I would say is that it depends very much about the medium that you're going to. And I think what Christian is saying is absolutely right in terms of Hollywood being very key for you know, that personality and character. I think that's what is suitable for movies, right? Movies are very much about that human connection. But crossing, you know, the strength of an IP isn't just about going to movies, it's about crossing different media. So it might be, for example, Warhammer, right? Began as a tabletop game, and it's still a hugely successful tabletop game. But bringing Warhammer into video games was not necessarily about character. It was about the world, and it was about a set of rules that was interesting, that matched really closely with Total War. So I think Christian is absolutely bang on about movies, and I think that's where that character connection comes from. But there's loads of other places to go. You go tabletop, you can go to video games, you can go into pillowcases, you can go into fashion. You know, there's loads of different places to go. And, you know, sometimes a feeling or a world or a brand, you know, it can be as valuable as character.
Okay.
Yeah, but the character's the Space Marine.
Jan, what I think is extremely interesting and intriguing about Iron Harvest is that you have a video game genre that is not really famous for having strong characters, because like real-time strategy, RTS, and that you have managed to have on the one side a very interesting universe, this battle tag, the post-World War or pre-World War the setting, plus you have memorable characters with Anna and the bear. Did you put them into the game? Did you integrate them into the game on purpose, or have you been influenced by the pictures of the Polish artist? I think because he already has the girl and the bear in one of his pictures, right?
Right. I mean, we have 9 playable heroes, so to say, in the game. and 3 of them are based on the artworks by Jakub Różalski, and Anna was one of the old ones. Basically, we took over. In general, we had this plan to do a campaign that is very. We wanted to do strong campaigns first of all, and so we looked at the campaigns we thought were maybe the best in the genre, which was Warcraft 3, for example, StarCraft, things like that. And all of these campaigns, they all have strong characters, and you remember Reyna, you remember Arthas and whatever. And so we definitely wanted to have characters in there, and made them a very important component not only of the campaign but of the whole game. And of course that helps us now that when we're thinking about add-ons or maybe spin-off projects or whatever, then of course we can use these 9 different heroes we introduced, and hopefully people remember them and recognize them, and then eventually they can become an important part of the IP.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's in general, people react to other people, and they react to faces, and you can, of course, tell a story without ever showing, some personal, close-up thing. But if you, tell a story about a war and it's just, people and people fighting and there are numbers and whatever, that's never as impactful as, having and personal struggles and having likable characters. I mean, this is one of the big things we thought about. How can we actually make sure that each character, even if they are more maybe on the evil side, or let's say they have a little darker gray in the gray area, how can we give them a backstory, or how can we make sure that people can still identify with them, and I think this is something that movies do very well. They can introduce characters quickly and make people care about them, but in video games we have the luxury of having more time, and people spend more time with the characters, but it doesn't feel like all games really utilize that as well as they could, because some characters feel just a little bit flat compared to movie characters. And so I think there is a big potential.
Mm.
So we have a question in chat, and I'm trying to do a good transition here, where so Iron Horus was inspired by visuals, by painting. So there were still images that conveyed certain art style, and so it went from visuals to video game to something interactive. But oftentimes we have it the other way around, where we have a video game and people try to make it into a movie. So we take out this this interactive component. There's nothing the audience can actually do than watch. And there's an example of the movie Doom, where they tried to transfer this first-person gameplay style into the movie. And chat is asking if any of you think that this test was a fail, or if you think that we will see something similar in the future. And yeah, Christian, you already were laughing, so maybe you want to take this one.
No, I don't. Yeah, I think it's a failure. Yes, I think it's a failure. What Rowan was saying, if you're coming to a new medium, you have to attack it on that medium's strength. And the strengths of the movies is not gun cameras. It's telling a story with emotions and things like that. So I think, I actually think that's a failure. But what we get a lot is the question, hey, in our game, you can make your character look like anything, right? Play Bloodborne. Nobody's character looks like the character on the Bloodborne poster, but everybody knows what that character looks like. So if you don't have a character, maybe just put him on the poster. Maybe make him represent the experience that the player will have in the game. If you can make a Bloodborne movie tomorrow, and we all know what that character would look like, right?
Oh yeah, speaking of, Rowan, so characters and looks and fan expectations, everyone probably saw the the reactions to the first trailer of the Sonic movie that was released this year. And yeah, I mean, there was some serious backlash. So what are your thoughts? How is this handled internally when an IP, which, I mean, technically and, in terms of law, belongs to a company or a person, but then once it goes out there and it becomes such an iconic figure as Sonic, and it becomes also part of, people think they own the idea of that somehow, and how do you think about that? How is that handled?
Yeah, it's a really good point, because I mean, I think it's a really good example of being aware of the audience and their expectations. And I say all this from a position of, I don't look after the Sonic brand, and that's our fantastic Sonic Pillar team. They really know it absolutely 100%. But I'm more about bringing the next Sonic to market. But still, I think it's a good lesson for us about expectations and audience, because it's no secret, as you say, that fans were not happy with that design and they wanted changes about what that was. So that message was very, very clear. And it's a good lesson that any creative property, a game, a book, a cartoon, whatever, doesn't live in isolation. It's about what the audience brings to it. It's a partnership between the creator and the audience. You are creating an idea in that audience's mind. It's going to be really different for every person who experiences it. And, we talk about the value of an IP, right? All of us do that. It only has value if the audience values it. It's what they bring to it. It's a partnership there. And in this age we're in now of social media, we find out much quicker about what that audience values, which I think is what happened with Sonic there. And that's something we can lean into, right? I mean, collaborating with your audience to make something more valuable is something great. And that's something we can do. I mean, Fortnite, for instance, recently, I think I saw a story where there was a meteor coming to the island and it was going to crash into it and change everything. And the expectation from the audience was it would be hitting Tilted Towers. And so the developers were listening, they were hearing about that. And as it came, they could actually make it aim towards Tilted Towers and just veer off at the last minute, playing with those expectations and making something good there. And at SEGA, we think really carefully about how we partner with the expectations of a community, because it's as much theirs as it is ours, right? We have a platform called Games Together, Amplitude Studios, who made Endless Legend, Endless Space, Humankind is coming up too. It's a platform that they use to co-develop games. It's a co-creation software, really. It's a forum where feedback is gamified. Players can track development, they can design elements that might make it into the game, they can play early unreleased code that might improve it and alter the course of the game. So it means that we can trust our community, we can listen to them, we can make sure we're matching or exceeding expectations. And that's something that whenever you are building something, whether that's Sonic or whatever, any of the IP we've been talking about, that sense of expectation, that sense of partnership is absolutely valuable, because, if you can get them to buy into that, then they will start doing cosplay. They'll start building fan art on Tumblr. They'll keep on growing it, and then it just accelerates beyond what you're doing.
Yeah. Because we were speaking about the Sonic movie, and I think because it's such an iconic and very good example of what we are talking about right now, and I want to ask all of you, if there's something like an iconic creature like Sonic, an IP that kind of like big parts of the brand of SEGA is probably, or like the company of SEGA is relying on, maybe even like build on its success. If you then transform it into a movie, how do you do that? Do you just put Sonic inside of the movie, and the idea is we just make a movie with Sonic and it will run? Or do you have an idea of a movie and then say, okay, maybe we can use Sonic for it?
I mean, I think in general, it's a lot about, knowing if it makes sense for a movie, because I think some IPs that are great for games might be great for, other areas as well, but not necessarily for movies, because nobody's really waiting for it. And also sometimes I have the feeling that, there's a lack of respect for the source material. I mean, of course, I totally agree that, a movie needs to be a good movie. And so you can't, put too much from the game into the movie, or like, movies and games and books work very differently. And so you have to, of course, adjust a lot of things. But we talked about the Monster Hunter movie earlier. And I don't really get it, to be honest, because when you watch the trailer, they call it Monster Hunter, but they show stuff that is not Monster Hunter. So people who like Monster Hunter already like that, feel like alienated, and they think, okay, there are Humvees and MGs, and I don't know, this is not really Monster Hunter, so that's not really interesting for me. That's not the IP I love. And people who don't know Monster Hunter, for them, it's not relevant that there is the Monster Hunter brand on it. And so I don't really get why, if they want to make a movie about, monsters on Earth and hunting them down by the US Army, then do that, but don't call it Monster Hunter. Because then, it's for me, it's weird. And I think this is a big part of the reason why many video game adaptations and movies don't really work, because for the game fans, it's weird and it's off. And for everybody else, it's not relevant that there is a gaming IP behind it.
Isn't it weird that obviously so many video game companies don't seem to, I don't know, like are not really interested, or not willingly, or not experienced enough to take care of their IP so that they don't turn into really shitty movies?
Yeah. Can I
Please
say something?
Yeah.
In my last job, I toured Hollywood with a number of game pitchers, pitching agents, these projects. And what you have to realize about Hollywood is that it's completely talent-driven. So people rarely invest in, the strength of the concept or the strength of the script or whatever. Yes, they will invest in a big fan base, but after that, what they invest in is a really good director or a really good showrunner who has proven that he or she can bring something to market for this audience. They're going to be taking millions of decisions over 3 years in order to make the finished movie or TV series. So you're investing in that person. And the problem is then that if that person transforms the idea along the way, it's very difficult for the game studio to jump off, because they've committed to a $100 million movie. So it's complicated. And Hollywood and the games industry work very, very differently. Hollywood is talent-driven, and you go from show to show. Games are company-driven, and you have a job for a long time. It's very different.
No, I agree, but in the end, everybody wants to make money and wants to make a good movie, and so if it has been proven again and again that this isn't working, then at some point someone should say, okay, actually, let's do it another way. It could be that maybe something like The Witcher, or I don't know, maybe is a first step in that direction, but it baffles me that for 20 years there is one crappy gaming movie after the other, and nobody seems to notice, or I don't know, nobody seems to think that maybe it would be a good idea to do it differently. It's weird.
Speaking of crappy movies,
it's about the fact that it's not about that. It's about the fact that for 20 years, no good directors wanted to make game properties.
What about Uwe Boll? Come on, he's great. Uwe Boll is perfect. He did so many great movies.
That's on you, man.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of crappy video game adaptations, movie adaptations of video games, of good video games, because that's always what people want to do. They want to create a movie based off of a successful video game. No one wants to do the opposite, even though it would be interesting, I think. But Rowan, we saw a Sonic movie, and chat is wondering, how would a new Super Mario Brothers movie look like?
Oof, that's a question for Nintendo, not for me. My word, it's a tricky one at Super Nintendo. I think with Mario, because he's not a character that talks, he's mute. It kind of stands for the player character. Kind of ties into that conversation we were having about Doom earlier on, right? With these first-person games, what does your character stand for there? It's much more about a world than it is about necessarily that. Very different. I think, that's where we kind of see something like, I don't know, the 80s Super Mario movie, which was just, it didn't feel like Mario, right? And I think you always have to come back to what the core of what that IP is. An IP is about an idea, right? And it only has value if that stays coherent, stays true. I guess all I would say to that is that best of luck to Nintendo for trying to find a movie there. And I don't know whether you make it about the personality of Mario himself or whether you make it about the world. That's the way I would probably recommend. But best of luck to them. I think they're going to have a challenge.
I would really like to come back a
Maybe
little
out
bit.
Of Sonic, you can make it out of anything. So if you
Sonic's
can make
got a
movie out of
personality,
Sonic,
I
all he
take
does
your
is run.
point. I would disagree with that.
That's
I
it.
think there's probably been a bit more of an exploration of what Sonic's character is over the years than Mario's, because everything from all the RPGs, Dark Brotherhood, everything else, the comics, you know very much what Sonic's personality is, what his core is, what his character is, how he talks, how he interacts. You know that, but just the very thought of Mario, the vocabulary is very much limited because he's like Gordon Freeman out of Half-Life. It's someone that you put yourself into. It's a process rather than the character. And to the point that you were making earlier on, Christian, I think there is a better defined character there for Sonic than there is for Mario. So I think it suits that movie, medium a lot better. And I mean, I took my kids to see the Sonic movie and they absolutely loved it, right? So, I mean, that's the only kind of gauge I can give that. So it worked for them. And so I think, it's a clearer opportunity there.
I think we've got two interesting questions. We've got two interesting questions from the chat. And I would like to quote Bürgermeister Lima. He is asking, what is the perfect character from video games right now that can be turned, like the game hero that you want to see in the movie in the future? Like, do you have a favorite where you say, okay, this is wasted potential?
I mean, I think both of us waited a long time and then finally.
Do you want to go, Christian?
Go ahead.
No, I just want to say no.
Oh, okay. I mean, the obvious one is one that they're already working on already, which has been tricky by itself, which is Uncharted, right? It's built in order to take advantage of that. It takes so many of the tropes from Indiana Jones and those kind of 80s action movies. You look at that and you are basically playing a movie. It brings so much that in. But it's very interesting that even that's probably the closest copy over you think that could work, right? And that's had a very troubled development. Although it seems to be on track now. I mean, from what Tom Holland is doing and Mark Wahlberg, that's hopefully back on track. It's going to look great. And I have every faith that it will be. I suspect that the challenge there is less about suitability of the IP, and it's probably, as Christian said, more of an industry thing. Probably just different expectations about how each industry works and the level of control that each of them want over it. I suspect that's the challenge there. But I mean, as we say, I mean, there's been an awful lot of the time I think that maybe TV is a better medium than movies for these sort of properties, which has done very well. Castlevania is great. There's I think they just announced Assassin's Creed, because there you've got a longer amount of time to explore a world and a group of people in the tapestry, which is more of what about gaming is about than that single one-person story, which is what movies are about.
Christian, I think you wanted to chip in there.
Yeah, I was thinking Ghost of Tsushima would be great. I think that's a game with a really good story, and for once it's a game where the story is great, the characters are great, and the gameplay and the story fit together really well. You evolve in the same way, gameplay-wise, as the character does. And then I'd like to see Hades. That could be funny.
All right, we're almost done. I would like to give you a chance to address the audience, the viewers, and give them any last words of advice to turning their games into successful IPs, maybe. Maybe we start with Jan.
I mean, it's hard. I think, first of all, make a great game, and that's really hard in itself. And so, I'm not sure if, everybody should, think about, step 6 and 7 and 8 and all of that. When they start making a game, maybe, it makes more sense to focus on the first, couple of steps. And, then when you maybe have a couple of strong games under your belt, then think about the next steps, because, as we said earlier, if, what you need first is you need a game that is very good, very successful, and a lot of people love, and then you have, the potential, then you can potentially make, an IP out of it. But you can't do it the other way around. You can't have great plans for an IP and not having, interesting characters or an interesting world or, a really good game, you know. And so I would say first things first.
Right,
Yeah,
Rowan.
I'd really just follow what Jan said there. He's absolutely right. The game has to come first. You know, otherwise, as I say, you're building a castle on sand. You've got to have that emotional core. You've got to have that connection. You've got to know what your property is about. You've got to be able to understand and explain that to someone super quickly and really sort of have something there that's going to really help you. But, you know, from that point onwards, the next step of growing it is about uniqueness, about making it something that nothing else is out there. What are you offering that nobody else is? How can you separate yourself out from what else is on the market? And then if you think about that vision about where it can go next, think about flexibility. Think about how you can maintain the core of what that IP is, but still turn it to something else and adapt it for what the needs and requirements are for another medium and what you might need to do to change that in order to make that work.
Christian, any last words?
Yeah, I think the big difference here is, are you a small developer or a big developer? If you're a small developer, don't even think about just make a great game and try to survive the next quarter. If you're a bigger developer and you know you can make good games, then you're an idiot if you're not making IPs. Because if you understand gameplay, you understand tech, you need a unique character. It needs to be relatable to the audience, and then you need to build a brand around it. Yeah.
Awesome.
I think.
Thank the three of you very, very much for this interesting panel. That was a good summary in the end. Christian, thank you very much. So yeah, see you soon. Stay safe, stay healthy. Yeah, goodbye.
You too.
Bye.
Thanks very much.
Great. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
All right, Tim.
Yeah, Utz.
Any last words from you?
Yes, I don't really think that there will be anything like a very good game coming out of a movie and a very good movie coming out of a game. I mean, okay, there has been Spider-Man. That was a great game coming from a movie, coming from a comic book. I think we still have to wait until Uwe Boll is going to make the next one.
All right. Yeah, awesome. Speaking of the next one, so we're done with this panel, and I'm going to yield my hosting duties to Marcus for the rest of the day. So I'll be seated in one of these chairs. For our next spot, which is going to be another Let's Play, we're going to take a quick break, and then next up, we're going to look at, I have to just check real quick, Kraken Academy. So you're new kid in school and you get magical powers from magical kraken or something. So it sounds super wild. If you want to find out what it is all about, stay tuned until after the break.